Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We hope that you enjoyed this session, but then again, we're sure that you will. We're really excited that Anne is here presenting, and we look forward to hearing all about her work and awareness and activism. And we hope that you all are excited as well. I mentioned it briefly, but just to say it again, if you have questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end. And you can send them in the chat, or you can unmute at the end and ask them yourself. Tyler is recording. And so, yeah, we hope that you enjoy this session. And also, if you're able to come to some of the other ones this week, then make sure to do so. With that, I'll pass it on to Anne.
Thank you, Isabel. So thanks so much to you and to the university for hosting me and for developing this incredible program of many speakers and all kinds of events for to think about the earth over this month and what we can all do to make a difference with the planet. So I am going to go ahead and get started. I'll share my screen here. Okay, hang on just a minute. I thought I had that up, but I didn't. All right, just a second. There we go. All right. So this is where I live and work in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. On the left is a building that I own that I inherited from my late dear partner, Stephen Moore. I have a studio on the first floor there, which you can see on the left, and I live up on the second floor. And I have a couple of creative tenants who help pay the rent, which is really awesome. Keeps me going and keeps my art going. And you can see my studio here on the right, part of it. It's kind of an L shape with lots of tables and lots of projects going on. So I wanted to start by talking about some of my early influences as a child. I grew up in Southern California, and of course, the ocean and the beach were a big part of my experience. I love that just kind of empty, wide horizon, which I do not get in Pittsburgh, and I really dearly miss. And you'll see it showing up later in my art, being that I can't be there, especially since I can't travel there right now. I'm making some art about it lately. So there's the ocean and also these beautiful rolling hills in Southern California that sadly are burning more and more often these days. And art. Art was a huge influence on me from when I was very young. My father loved art. He was somewhat of an art collector. He had friends who were artists, and he took me to the museum all the time. And this painting is probably the first painting that I can remember. And I just loved it. I love the colors. I love those round, gorgeous shapes. I love that, this chair that had this wonderful pattern and rhythm to it. And I've never forgotten it. So, but I was also influenced by growing up during the Cold War, having duck and cover exercises, and seeing bomb shelters on people's front lawns. That's another really early memory, is something similar to this picture on the right. So that played out many years later when, after I got my undergraduate degree, I moved to Southern California with Stephen. We met while I was in college, at San Jose State. And we had friends who were teaching, and they started this project that we became involved with. So it was a collaboration that we called Unarm in the 80s, early 80s. And there was a series of these nuclear festivals called Target LA, with the idea that what would happen if an atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Los Angeles. And that was a real, a real concern. That was something that was on our minds during this time period. And so this group started, not an armed group, but another group started this. It was like a nuclear arts festival. There were speakers, you can see games of nuclear chants, art exhibits, performances, poetry readings, and so on. And we, Unarm, developed a project for that called Zone 7. So the idea of Zone 7 was if a bomb was dropped on Los Angeles, 100 miles out would be Zone 7. And how would you be affected, 100 miles away? So what we did as part of the festival was that we created this installation. The whole festival was in this abandoned parking garage, which was, very apropos for Los Angeles. And so we had this installation, and it was like a wagon train of cars. So the idea being, what if a bomb dropped and you were on the LA freeway? That could be very possible. And so maybe all the cars would sort of form a circle, like a wagon train, and people would build a fire in the middle and, and make do. And we had radiation gear on, and we sat there very still as mannequins, and people thought we were mannequins, and then we would move and it would really startle people. And so it was very effective. And we went on to do a number of different projects like this. So 10 years later, Stephen got a job in Guam, and I went to visit him. And close to Guam, you can see Guam is here, and close to Guam was Tinian Island. And Tinian Island was where the bombs took off for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There's an abandoned military base there. And so we thought, given our history of Unarmed, we were going to check this out. And so we took this little prop plane and went to Tinian Island, which you can see on the left here. It was almost impossible to find this place. It was so overgrown, and the signage was very hard to even find. But we did manage to find it, and you can see there that it was mostly just abandoned, like buildings and things like that, and these runways that you can see here. But they had these two signs, atomic bomb pit number 1 and number 2, that were landscaped. And the idea was that the planes that took off for Hiroshima and Nagasaki drove over, the bombs were so heavy that they had to put them in these pits and then have the plane go over the pit and lift the bombs into these planes, into the 2 planes that took off for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we thought, we need to do something about this, because we need to address this through our artwork, because this place is this is a major historic site, and it's like nobody knows about it, and it's like abandoned pretty much. So we took lots of photographs, and those photographs translated into a number of art installations, which I will show you in a minute. But it also, this sparked a atomic pilgrimage that really spanned pretty much 10 years, where we not only went to Tinian, but in subsequent years, we went to Japan, we went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we also went to sites in the US, including I was living, and Stephen returned to Seattle. So Hanford Nuclear Reservation is near Seattle, and then also White Sands, Missile Base, Missile Range, and a number of other sites. So the first exhibition that we did, which was a year prior to the 50th anniversary of the atomic bombings, and we did this at Washington State University, where Joe, who's with us today, Joe Hockenhull, where Joe Hockenhull was teaching, and she was very instrumental in us having this exhibition at Washington State University, which is near Hanford. And so a lot of our photographs and just impressions of Japanese culture, how Japanese culture kind of absorbed a lot of American culture, that mix, which we thought was interesting and kind of strange in a lot of ways. And it just perplexed us. So we loved Japan when we visited, but there's a really interesting mix. And so that translated into this exhibition. And then in 1997, before I get into that, I'll just say that in 1995, for the actual anniversary, we had an exhibition at Maryhill Museum, which was very close to Hanford on the Columbia River. So then in 1997, we produced another exhibition. So we ended up producing 3 installation exhibitions about this topic, about nuclear war, nuclear waste, the Cold War, and so on. 3 exhibitions that we showed over a period and developed over a period of a decade. So Shadow was the second one, and it was the idea of like the legacy or the shadow of the atomic bombs, right? So that had a lot to do with nuclear waste, and a big part of that exhibition was this timeline that was etched in these stones that went in the future to 170,000 AD, which is where we predicted, and we did work with some experts on this, but it's not easy to calculate, where 1% of the radioactive waste from the first atomic bomb would be remaining, 170,000 AD. And then we went backwards in time, the same amount of time, which went back to the last ice age. So that was a timeline, and it showed different kind of technological advances and so on. And there was also a website that gave a lot of extra information about each of these dates and the importance of it and so on. So I ended up going, I was living at the time, as I said, in Seattle, and I decided I wanted, after a long break of a number of years, to go to graduate school. And one of the reasons I wanted to go was that I wanted to understand and dive into why are we finding ourselves at this moment in history where we're threatening the life support systems of both human and non-human nature? What has led to that, right? What attitudes, what histories, what religious beliefs, what values or lack of values. I wanted to look at that question from a lot of different disciplinary perspectives. So when I got out of graduate school, Steffi Domike was someone I met while in graduate school. We were both older, we kind of bonded, and we ended up working together for about 12 years developing a number of art installations, actually 12 art installations about environmental issues. And this was the first one, the first major one that we did at the Hudson River Museum.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see, you can get a sense of the installation here. These were like oversized postcards, which I'll explain in a minute, the front and the back. This was the Sawmill River up here as it flows into the Hudson River. And these cloths were soaked in various locations in the rivers to visually highlight what might be in those rivers. So the museum had a historic postcard collection, and we had done some other postcard projects. We were really interested in it, and we worked with a historian that they assigned us, and we looked through them and found ones that intrigued us and got some of the history behind it from the historian. And we then went to places that we thought maybe we weren't trying to be really accurate, but that might be reminiscent of the original photograph. So you can see that here with this one, with the bridge and the highway, and then the stamp on the postcard was the original image, the original postcard image. And then you can see us soaking the cloth there. So the postcards, there was a historic narrative of that place that was accurate, though we selected the histories we wanted to show, we wanted to highlight. And then this fictitious narrative of maybe a tourist coming to the area, and whether their reaction to this post-industrial area, which was Yonkers, New York, north of New York City. It's a post-industrial area, and what people responded to how it was evolving into something maybe more sustainable and life-affirming. So this was another project that we did called Food Carbon in the Commons in 2007. It was also it was shown here in Pittsburgh at the Andy Warhol Museum. It was also shown in Germany at a climate exhibition, climate change exhibition. And the idea was that this was an inverted food pyramid where we would try to indicate the carbon footprint of the food we eat. So on the local level, there's less food options, but also less carbon emitted. And we indicated the carbon with jars of charcoal. And then at the national level, more food available, but more carbon expended, and international, even more so, right? And because it was a Warhol Museum, we had this idea of kind of playfully using the imagery that sort of the graphic imagery of Warhol in these food items. So we also had a menu, which in the menu handout that people could take away, and that showed, instead of prices, it showed carbon expended. And at the opening, we dressed up like we were waitresses, and we took orders, and then we would tally up the carbon expended for the person. So the last exhibition that we did together, so remember there were 12, I'm only showing you 3 of these, was called Moving Targets. And Moving Targets was, it was sparked by Joel Greenberg, who is a historian, a natural historian based in Chicago. He had done a natural history of Chicago, and he's also like an avid birder, and he was trying to drum up, going around the eastern US and trying to drum up interest in commemorating the 100th anniversary of the extinction of the passenger pigeon. So I want to say, don't get confused. It's not the carrier pigeon, which is alive and well. It is the passenger pigeon. And the passenger pigeon, there were just reports that there were so many birds that it would blacken the skies. Their flocks would blacken the skies, and they went extinct in a period of like 40 years. So, so Steffi and I went to a lecture of his, and we were really intrigued, and we got a hold of him, and we decided to do a project. So, what we wanted to do was parallel the extinction of the passenger pigeon with the flight of our our mother's families from the Ukraine to North America. And the idea that we were kind of trying for was, is there that much of a difference? How much of a difference is there between how we treat certain groups of people, in this case, Jews, because Steffi's Jewish on her mother's side, and I'm Jewish on both sides. And that's part of the reason why our families left the Ukraine in the first part of the 20th century, way before the Holocaust. But still, you know, Jews were being isolated, right, and restricted, and didn't have a lot of options in the Ukraine, and so they left. And so the question being, how much of a difference is there between how certain groups of people and certain populations of animals are treated? As we felt, especially reading accounts of what happened to these birds and how they were just so brutally slaughtered. I mean, there was so much slaughter. It's like they couldn't even use all the birds that they killed. It was just like mayhem. And it reminded us so much of what happened during the pogroms in Eastern Europe, the same kind of sort of fervor and just craziness. So we wanted people to think about that idea. So we created these backdrops. And in this case, the map showed the flight range, the migration range, and the nesting range of the birds. And then on top of these maps, we had these little sort of visual stories, right, of the forest that they lived in, the kind of food that they ate, and some of the methods that were, were used to kill them, including, you can't see it very well here, nets was one. They had all kinds of crazy methods for killing these birds in vast numbers, and then the maps also showing our parents and where they migrated from, which I'm not showing you here, but there was a map of the Ukraine. And then here in the New York area, which is where Steffi's family migrated to, and my family that went to Alberta, Canada, and then eventually to California. And this here is my mother and my sister and me, the baby. And my mother she was born in the Ukraine, and as a child came to Canada. It must have been just an amazing journey with several children, and I can't imagine what that must have been like. And I didn't know much about my mother until I started this project. We actually had Ruth Falman Fitchman, who is a anthropologist, and she was unemployed at the time, a friend of Steffi's, and she did a lot of research for us, which was really wonderful. So along with the exhibition, and we show the exhibition in I think 5 venues around the eastern US in I think 4 different states. We had these posters. So they gave a lot more information about both the birds and our families, and for historical context. So these posters were made actually by the University of Michigan's Natural History Museum for the anniversary, and they made them available for anybody who wanted to use them. So that was great. And then we developed our own posters in the same format, right? So looking at what was going on in the Ukraine and what was called the Pale of Settlement, where the Jews were kind of corralled into, they could only be in that certain area of the Ukraine, and how they eventually got to this continent. So the first venue that we showed this in had this amazing library with these wonderful shelves, totally empty. And we thought, well, we got to do something with this. This is just too great a space to not do anything with. The space was not like a regular museum. It was like an old house. It was a Brushwood Center near Chicago, and it had this library. And so we invited 14 artists to create passenger pigeon portraits, which we showed in this space. And each artist represented a state in which the birds nested. And some of this information down here was sort of process, showing their research and photographs that they referred to in making the portraits. So, as I said, the exhibition was shown in 5 venues, and 2 of the venues only showed the portrait gallery, one of them being this University of Maryland, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the Art and Environment Gallery, which is run by my friend, who's an artist and a scientist, a fisheries biologist, Sarah Adlerstein Gonzalez there, and Steffi Domike. And you can see the thing that was really nice about this is that it wasn't in a room off by itself. They had these huge cases that were so big you could stand up in them. And they were in the common area where the students resided, or where they studied and ate and so on, that was in the natural resources department. So after moving targets, and I also want to say we produced a wonderful catalog that details every one of those images and so on, and has essays from Joel Greenberg and a number of other people. It's really a wonderful catalog. After moving targets, and now we're up to like 40 years of me doing this kind of work, basically. And I decided I really want to, let's say why I wanted to do this work in the first place was because I felt that people just weren't paying attention. They didn't know what was going on, or they didn't want to know what was going on, that I wanted to use my art to bring attention to these environmental issues. But 40 years later, it's like, it's all over, and it's everywhere in the news, and climate change is, everywhere. Everybody's talking about it. And so if people don't know at this point, my art isn't going to help matters. So I really wanted to just get back to being what I was inspired by when I was a kid, which was being an artist. I almost hate to admit it, but I really have a romantic idea about being an artist that comes from when I was a kid. And my father, who loved art and really loved artists, and I just decided I want to go back to that, right? It's sort of like going for full circle. And so And I've always loved printmaking, even though I started out as a painter. And so I started doing these prints, and I started studying botanical art and botanical art, the history of botanical art, which I think is really fascinating. And so there's a program here at Phipps, which is a wonderful facility, and has a wonderful education program. And so I started taking classes there and learning about the techniques of botanical art, from a more of a scientific and Linnaean perspective. And so I was doing these pieces. And I was also using solar plate etching. So etching, which I'll show you in a minute here, is a process of somehow incising lines in a metal plate, which then you push ink into and wipe the surface off. And you really need a press with pressure to get the ink out of those lines. And the traditional method uses acids, which aren't very environmentally friendly. But there are these solar plates that are treated, and you can just expose them with UV light. So that's what I started doing. And you can see here someone in my studio I had as a guest who is inking the plate and then wiping it off. And then you can start to see an image down here, and then putting it in the press and putting it through the press. So in 2018, as you can see here, I was very fortunate to, I'm just looking at the time here, I'm doing all right. I was very fortunate. I'll tell you a little story of how this happened, because it's a really good story, I think. Is that I was doing this sort of West Coast tour, starting from Los Angeles. I flew into Los Angeles, and then I basically more or less took a train, stopping along the way, visiting friends, including Joe here, and going all the way up to Seattle for the most part. I had a few rides here and there, but mostly it was a train. And the last leg of the train, I met this woman by accident. Her name was Judy Lee, and she taught at, what was it, Oregon. Well, taught at one of the universities in Oregon State, and and it was just happenstance that I sat next to her. I sat with her in the dining car or the cafe car, because there was no place else to sit. I asked her if I could sit down. We started talking. And lo and behold, it turned out that she was really interested. And I didn't say anything about being an artist or anything. She started talking to me about that she was really interested in art and combining science and art. And I went, oh my God, that's amazing. I have met this person just like this. And she told me about this residency. And she helped me with the connections to be able to do this residency. And it was really great too, because it's really an artist residency more than an writer's residency more than an artist residency. So they had a formal process for writers, but they didn't really have a formal process for artists. So basically, I just submitted a portfolio, and they said, yeah, great, come. So I was there for 2 weeks, and there was a writers conference going on one weekend in between the 2 weeks, which was wonderful. I loved attending that. They invited me, and that was wonderful too. But mainly I just stayed in, they had a great apartment, fully, like kitchen, bathroom, total full on apartment that they made, available to me. And I just I love I lived in Seattle for 10 years, and I love the Northwest. That is like my favorite place that I've lived is the Northwest. And so the forests, the mosses, the the soft ground with all the pine needles, the smells, and there's a sweet little river running through there. And I created these pieces. In a way, I think they are botanical pieces, but they're about, sort of like zooming in, right? Zooming in on the details, the colors, the textures, and so on of the forest floor. And then playing around with maybe combining these two things, right? The real almost microscopic look at the environment there, and also some more botanical formal drawings. So back to printmaking and getting up to the present here. I did solar printmaking for a couple of years, and then I started doing relief printmaking, which I had done many, many years before. And you can see I'm still with the botanical theme, but loosening up here. I found that those classes that I was taking were very, they really improved my skills, which was the main reason I was doing it. I wanted to improve my drawing skills and, just how to depict the plants and being more aware of them and so on. And it really was a great education for I don't know, maybe about 4 years I was taking classes. But I finally felt like it was too tight for me. I never intended that tight, what they call Linnaean, right? So if you go back to the time of Linnaeus, and people were before photography, that was the way that they documented plants. They did them very, very, very detailed, and they tried to do them very scientifically and showing all the different parts of the plant and so on. And a lot of people, botanical art is really in its renaissance today. And there's wonderful botanical artists, but my aim was never really to be that is the end goal, right? And so I kind of went back to taking what I learned and applying it in a more expressive way, right? So again, in a way, this is like looking at the more details, the ginkgo here, and then kind of stepping back, sort of maybe micro and macro kind of look of the tree, how the branches are, and how the leaves, are on the branches and the tree in the background there. And so again, just a few other images. So I also started doing monotype, and the idea of monotype is that mono meaning one. It's kind of like you do a painting on a flat surface, and then you take a print of it, right? And you can get a lot of interesting effects doing that, but you only get one unique print. But I started combining monotype with relief. So the color being the monotype that I did first, and then I would do a relief print on top, and I'll show you here what a relief print is, which is kind of the reverse of the other process I showed, the etching, or kind of the general term is intaglio, right? So intaglio is, again, carving into a surface, usually a metal plate. You rub the ink on into those grooves, you wipe off the surface, and then you print it. This is like a stamp. It's a reverse of that, right? You cut out areas from the earlier version of lino was woodcut, right? People started doing this same process with wood centuries ago. It was one of the first printmaking processes was carving wood. But then lino cut was developed. And I found out recently that the abstract expressionists were doing linocut. Both woodcut and started doing linocut too. They discovered that medium. So traditional lino is actually a pretty natural product made with, I think, like linseed oil and wood chips and things like that. Other kinds of lino is plastic. So at any rate, so you carve it, which you can see here, and then you roll up with ink, and the ink is on the top surface instead of the reverse, right? Instead of it going in the grooves, it's on the top. It's like a stamp. So, so that's what I've been doing along with the monotypes. And so here it is. I told you at the beginning here that this was me longing for that horizon and that sort of emptiness and this space. When I first came to Pittsburgh, I was feeling really claustrophobic because everything is sort of tight here, kind of condensed. And I really miss that openness, right? So, so that's the kind of work I've been doing. And these are some recent pieces too. Small. These are like 5x7 or something. But again, that open landscape. So I also wanted to mention in closing here a few community projects that I've done over the years. So one of my reasons for going to graduate school, along with what I said about understanding how we got to this place in human history, where we're destroying our life support system, is that I also wanted to figure out how can I address that through my artwork. And one of the things I came away with from my graduate studies was working with the community. And that was something that I was interested in going into graduate school. And one of the reasons I picked Carnegie Mellon was because they had a focus on community. And actually, one of the people on my advisory team for my thesis was someone from the community, and a project came out of that with her that led to this project. So the idea of this and the previous project too was for youth to in the community where I am in Pittsburgh, to learn about the nature in their backyard, right? What they would see every day, and learn about the birds, the plants, and so on, and then draw them. And then those drawings would come together into these banners that they would paint, right? So, and I developed this program, which is on hold right now because of COVID. We were in the middle of a project when COVID hit and had to just put it on hold, but titled Luna, Learning Urban Nature Through Art. And so the idea here is, as I said, kids would learn about, or youth would learn about the plants and the animals and the birds and their relationship to one another. And then they would draw those things, and then what we did, sometimes with the students, sometimes not, depending upon the circumstances, and we would put those drawings together. So a lot of these banners, which are pretty big, they're like 3 by 6 feet, 2.5 by 6 feet. Okay. So, and the idea was that they would go up on light posts in the community so everybody could enjoy and see them. And that did happen in some cases. In other cases where there were, a lot of red tape to do that, we showed them in different community spaces. But this banner, for instance, was drawings of a number of students. Wasn't just one student, right? It's like they're drawing from one student and the flowers from another student and the fruit from another student. And as I said, we combine those together, or sometimes we work with the kids to put them together, depending. And then we'd have this big painting session where everybody would paint. And it was really, you can see this wouldn't work during COVID, unfortunately, but but it was really fun, and as like everybody just paints whatever, it's not about like, this is mine, this is my individual artwork, but it's a big community thing to paint together. And I don't think I have a picture of it in here, but we did a bunch of sessions where that we call banner blitzes, where we had extra banners that hadn't gotten painted, and we just invited anybody from the community, families, kids, could come and paint them, and parents and kids painted together, and it was really wonderful to see that, kids helping parents and parents helping kids. It was great. Oh, here it is. Yes, so you can see the parents and the kids painting together. This was a project that we did with Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, Frick Environmental Center. And the thing that was really nice about this project was that Phipps, or Frick, has a wonderful park and native plant garden and environmental educators. So this was a kind of two-part program, and the first part was that the environmental educators took us on a tour of the native plant garden and had pictures printed out of plants and bees and bugs and snakes and birds and all that. And after they told us about the native plants and the critters there, we then had a drawing session. And then a few weeks later, in between, we put the drawings together, and these are really big banners. They're quite large. And then we had a big painting session. So that worked out great. So these are all plants and critters that are in their native plant garden. And I think we did maybe four of these big banners, 4 or 5 of them. So the last project I want to show you here just quickly is one thing I've done off and on too is curate or be involved in community environmental and arts programs. And this was, as you can see, it went from 2019 to 2020, the start of 2020, just before COVID hit. We got the showdown right before. But it was up for several months and is in these big bay windows where there is a transit station. So there's a lot of traffic through here, which is really great. And I co-curated this with artist here, Katie Dement, for the Contemporary Craft Gallery and a group called Creatives for Climate. And so all of these artists, each bay had one or more artists who focused on different kind of aspects of nature, but also related to climate change, and artists who are changing their practices because of climate change. So in this case, this is a group of artists who are interested in using recycled fashion, recycled, clothing, reconfiguring it or using it as kind of a backdrop to make a statement. Or this artist here who is doing sun prints using native plants. And on my website, you can see a lot more about this project if you'd like to. And we had a group of students who came to visit and gave them a tour of the exhibition. And you can see some of the Luna banners here were part of the exhibition. And we actually sold 2 of them as a result of this, which was nice. So, oops, sorry. There's one other thing I wanted to show you. And I hit the wrong button. And where'd it go? All right. Can you see that? Did it come back? Okay. There we go. All right. So thank you very much for your attention and your interest. You are welcome to look on my website. I know I covered a lot of ground, and I could probably talk for a half an hour about each of those projects I showed you. So it was a little taste, so you can kind of get a sense of the breadth of my work over many years.
Oh, you're not going to Kingston. You're going to shoot.
Pardon me? I thought I heard someone. Anyway, but you are welcome to see more about my work in these projects on my website here. And if you want to know more about the Luna project, you can go to lunapittsburgh.org. So, all right. Thank you very much. And let's see, that was about an hour, not too bad. And I'd love to hear your questions or, comments, whatever.
First, I just want to say thank you so much for doing that wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, and I was texting people throughout it and saying that they had to watch the recording afterwards. So they'll do that as well, and they'll learn a lot too. So a few people had questions in the chat, and I just want to first give them the opportunity to ask those questions out loud if they want to. If not, then you can text in the chat and say, like, Isabel, read my question, and I can do that. But if you like to, then you can just ask the question. You can unmute and do it yourself as well.
Okay. And what was, I'll do it myself. Thanks, Isabel. I'm just blown away. This is wonderful.
Thank you, Ruth.
But what was the thrust behind getting rid of passenger pigeons? That's just incredible.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And that's a good question. And from what I learned, and it's not an easy answer, it's a complex answer, but there were a few different things that converged at the same time. One of them was the railroads, and the other one was the telegraph. So the telegraph allowed people to say, oh, the birds are nesting over there, go over there. And then once they got to that place, they could kill all these birds, they could stuff them in barrels, and then they could stick them on the trains. There was a market, there seemed to be a market for these pigeons, especially in the cities. They were like a delicacy, but also what I learned kind of later, and I don't know so much about this, is that there were some economic problems going on at the time period. So that was pushing it too, was people's need to make money and also just to eat. And the fact that these pigeons, they congregated in these pretty tight areas, right? They would all like go to a stand of trees, and apparently there were so many birds on the trees that they would actually break the branches of the trees. There were so many.
Oh my!
And they also didn't produce very many eggs, so I think only a few, per season. And so you combine all that together, and the idea that the people who were slaughtering these birds were not, they weren't thinking obviously about the fact that if they were going to kill the young or destroy the eggs, they would be wiping out the population, which is what they ended up doing, very sadly.
Wow.
Yeah, they
Wow.
use all kinds of crazy methods, like burning hay below the trees that would, kind of daze them with smoke. Even putting like whiskey, dousing whiskey on the hay bales or in the things that would attract them to get them drunk. Using baseball bats to whack them out. It's like unbelievable, really
Wow.
unbelievable what happened there. Yeah.
And well, just one more thing, and I'd like to encourage you to do a TED talk on this.
Yeah.
It's really, and I think, an eye opener for a lot of folks.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you, Ruth. I
That's it.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. It's an interesting tale. Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Mm.
That I was engrossed in for many years.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think this whole presentation was just wonderful, and I'm wondering where we could access it later so that I know I want to share it with some friends. It's really, Anne, you gave such a great history, and let so many people know all of the many, 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 many things you've done.
Thank
So,
you, Michelle.
Isabel, maybe you know where we can access the recording later?
Yeah, so we're going to upload it to probably the website, the Enviro-Art Gallery website itself, and also to a YouTube channel. So I can put the website name in the chat right now. Let me make
That'd be
sure that I
great.
spelled that right.
Mhm.
That's the website name, and then I don't know if today or like at the end of the week, but one of those we can email Anne and with the link, and then if you want to disperse it, Anne, as well to your students and friends,
Yeah.
then that would be great.
Thank you.
Of course.
Anybody else, or are there some things in the chat? I haven't looked at the chat.
There is one question in the chat that I can read off.
Mhm.
Let's see, because I think that Deanna might have had to leave a bit early before the Q&A. So it says, looking back at your two different arcs of art making, one being the activist art, science, history installations, and the other being the very personal work of painting and printmaking, can you talk about the difference of you personally in terms of being personally rewarding or demanding?
Mm.
Yep. That's also a complex question. Yeah. As I said, what spurred me to do the more activist, and I used to call myself an activist artist, but I don't feel like I really am at this point. What spurred me to do that was that, I love nature. I think all my work really has been about the relationship between humans and nature, and historically, we have always we humans, especially in the Western world, have put ourselves above nature,
Mm.
and looked at nature as if it was a thing instead of beings, and living creatures that deserve to have a life, just like we deserve to have a life, And so I wanted to try to activate people to care about, to look at themselves, to think about these issues, to think about their relationship to the natural world, and hopefully spur them to action. But yeah, part of the reason I finally, after 40 years, kind of felt like pulling back is because I was getting burned out. You know, doing these projects is just really exhausting. And when you're younger, you know, when you're younger, you might have the energy to do it. But I'm finding as I'm getting older that my energy is waning. You know, I even though I went to graduate school and I have taught at the university level, by the time I got out of graduate school, I was really too old. You know, I have to. Unfortunately, academia is pretty ageist, and especially toward women. And by the time I got out of graduate school, I was too old to get a permanent, you know, university position, which would help with things like funding and maybe graduate students that would help you with projects and all that kind of stuff. I didn't have those kind of resources. I was doing everything myself, you know, the fundraising, the PR, the work itself. Yeah, and it got to be too much. That along with the fact that, as I said, it sort of felt like I'd done what I could with this work, and if people don't know about these issues at this point, then they just don't want to know. But I think also, along with the fact that the personal work feeds me more, you know, on a personal level, especially at this point in my life, it kind of rejuvenates me. I also feel like maybe what people need is not so much hitting them over the head with all the problems that are out there, but maybe they need to be rejuvenated too. Maybe they need to see the beauty and mystery of nature and be reminded of that, especially in a world where more and more that is disappearing, especially in, you know, in a urban environment. So that was a long way around answering that question.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounded great. And that's actually interesting that you talk about the kind of like the Western idea of humans being above nature. Because I did read this one article, and I can send in the chat, but it was by Robin Kimmerer, and she's a botanist, but also, oh yeah, so a lot of people in here look like they know Robin well. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting, especially because in the English language, we say like it, and we don't really give any animacy to animate beings. I don't know if anybody else has a question. If not, then I think we'll wrap up, but I'll just give it maybe 10 seconds if anybody else wants to say anything.
So I can ask a question. And as Rick and I are sitting here, we're looking at the breadth and depth of your work, and we're quite amazed what we know and what we didn't know. But the thing that struck both of us was that from the beginning to the end, you show consummate skills and ability in the integration of research, editing, processing of images, editing of images. And on a certain level, that skill set just keeps getting more and more refined through the years. So I don't think we saw it as being all that different through the years, although maybe it's less collaborative now as you're refining a certain physical ability. You know, are we way off base there?
No, you're not off base, and I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I would like to think that there is a through line, even though the imagery and the forms might change. and maybe they don't change all that much. I'm not sure. I'm always interested in how other people see the work. You know, a lot of times it's hard for me, and I think for a lot of artists to see, you know, to take kind of a longer view. You know, like that old phrase of I'm only as good as my last my last piece that I published. I think writers say that, but I think it equally applies to artists, right? I'm only as good as the last piece I did. I sort of forget how much I've done.
Yeah.
And how they all relate together. Yeah. So I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Great.
I would just say a life well lived, and an art history in your life worth living.
Thank you, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased to thank all of you for being here, both students and my dear friends who've followed me, many of whom have followed me over the years and have cheered me on, even when I wasn't sure if I was going to keep going. Sometimes you do wonder, you know, if what you're doing is really making a difference. But as I say, you gotta have a reason to get up in the morning, even if it's just, you know, for you, right? Even if it's just to get in the studio and muck about, right? Because it's fun.
Yeah.
And hopefully it means something to someone else too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll give another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and for explaining all of this wonderful work that you've done. And thank you everybody for coming and asking your questions. Like I mentioned earlier, the recording will be on the website, and we'll email people who had registered for the event with the recordings. So yeah, thank you all, and we'll stop the recording, and then you guys can head off the Zoom.